What's going on, everybody? I want to do a quick test to make sure that we're all good to go. Just a quick little test. Um, it appears that we are good on Facebook. It appears that we are also good on YouTube as well. I think we just need to check Twitter. Okay, dope. So we're good on Twitter also. Um, if I am not good, speak now or forever hold your peace. I think that all of you can hear me pretty well, though. Right? I hope so. If you cannot hear me, let me know. If you can hear me, let me know. Yeah, I know we've been dealing with a crazy amount of sound issues recently, so try to make sure I get this sound right. Are we not live on Facebook? See, this is why we check these things. No, we're not live on Facebook. See, this is why we're supposed to check these things, people. Come on now. I need a producer team. Who wants to be on my producer team? Okay, good. So YouTube said we're good. Twitter said we're good. I'm gonna assume we're good on Facebook because nobody said anything. Hopefully, we'll stay good on Facebook. But I do want to go ahead and I want to get started because we have a lot to cover. I'm going to try to cover it all within 15 or 20 minutes. But there is a lot to cover indeed. So if you are listening to this from YouTube, thank you so much for joining. I greatly appreciate it. If this is your first time listening, I strongly urge you to subscribe because, well, uh, we do some good work here, and I'm proud of the work that we've accomplished, and I'm proud of where we're at and where we're going right now. And if you subscribe now, then you can be a part of the family who has been with us from the very beginning, that has helped us build up to where we're at right now. As anybody on this channel can tell you, it's about objective truth and nothing else. We keep it real above all else. And most people, I mean, I would say most people like what they hear, but even if you don't like what you hear, at least from me, it doesn't mean it isn't what you need to hear. I don't always like listening to what I need to hear, but eventually I grow into it. And we have a good mix of both conservatives and progressives on this channel, and a lot of them see eye to eye more often than they don't see eye to eye, which is a pretty awesome thing in my opinion. So if you're on Facebook, I do want to do a quick service announcement. Of course, Facebook has been constantly messing with us. Of course, changing even some of the algorithms and how you get discovered and things like that. And one of the things they did behind our back, which I didn't know, was if you like one of our pages, if you like my page, for example, you actually need to go to the follow button and press see first on that page. And that will be the only way you can make sure that when my comment or when my videos pop up, or if I make a new post, that you actually see that post. So make sure that if you're on Facebook, that you use the see first button, or you click that see first button so that you can see my videos when they come up, because a lot of people have been telling me that I haven't been popping up on their news feed. And of course, if you're on YouTube, make sure you hit that notification bell so that you can get updated whenever we drop some new fire. So I think that we're all good. I think everybody can hear me loud and clear. So I do want to go ahead and get started. So thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of Mi Casa es Su Casa. I am your host, Nico House, and you are listening to a live podcast because we have some breaking news. I was actually going to do my podcast on some information involving the Democratic Party, but this kind of came across my desk, and I was like, whoa, okay, we need to talk about this, because it's... If you've been keeping up recently with my posts, I've been talking a lot about the Parkland school shooting because a lot of it has not sat right with me. Like I said, I've always told people, don't believe that it's not real, because it is indeed real. No doubt in my mind that the Parkland shooting is real, that lives were really lost. Now, with that being said, I am also not a fucking idiot. And I am not naive. I am not the type of person who is going to believe a narrative simply because it is pushed to the forefront by mainstream media. I don't give a damn whether it's CNN, a senator, a congressperson, the president, or 17-year-old children. And I don't mean that in an offensive way. I mean that in a I've seen this time and time again, and I've learned by now that if CNN is pushing a particular narrative, if MSNBC is pushing it for a particular narrative, then we automatically should start questioning it, because that narrative usually runs opposite of the narrative that actually took place, that narrative that we should actually be paying attention to. And that narrative took a huge turn in the last 24 hours when a teacher, a high school teacher from Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, came out and said that she saw somebody who did not look like Nikolas Cruz. In fact, they looked as if they were a professional. They were in full body armor. Okay, they had a helmet on, and they had a rifle that she had never seen before. Now, you could take my word for this, or if you're watching live right now, you can share this video so that everyone else can hear from her mouth that there is a lot more to the shooting than what people have been told by the mainstream media. Take a listen.
Was playing music, writing love letters when the fire alarm went off. As students filed into the hallway, she heard gunfire. The killing had begun.
I was about 2 feet away from my door. All of a sudden I heard gunshots in the stairwell, which is about 20 feet away from my room. And then kids were screaming and then running back towards me and towards the end of the hallway. So I just went in this very strange autopilot mode where I pivoted on my feet. I unlocked my door, and the kids just started pouring in my room. I don't know how many kids were in there, but I was pulling them and getting them in and shouting at them to get in the room. And then I suddenly saw the shooter about 20 feet from me, standing at the end of the hallway, actively shooting down the hallway, just a barrage of bullets. And I'm staring at him thinking, why is the police here? This is strange, because he's in full metal garb, helmet, face mask, bulletproof armor, shooting this rifle that I've never seen before. I don't know when I decided it was the right time to close the door. I grabbed the handle with both hands, and that's when I got nicked, or grazed, or whatever you call it.
So a bullet hit your arm?
Yes. As I'm closing my door, I'm shouting at my next door neighbor, Mr. Scott Beagle, to close his door. And he's the kind of man that would just keep that door open a little longer. You know, he's all about the kids, you know, but he couldn't see the shooter. I had a good visual of him, which is why I yelled at him to shut his door now.
35-year-old teacher Scott Beagle among the 17 murdered on Marjory Stoneman Douglas's campus.
I heard him shoot a barrage of bullets into Mr. Beagle's room. And then he came to my room and shot about 4 or 5 shots into my room, breaking the glass of my door. There's a rectangular piece of glass. And I heard him continuously shooting down the hallway. And I never really knew when he left, because we just thought he was still there.
Once you all were inside the classroom, you were with your students.
Yes.
Covering them, kind of like a mother hen.
Yes.
Right.
Clutching. I think I left fingerprints in one girl. Giving eye contact to other kids who were shaking and freaking out, and I'm mouthing, it's okay, it's okay. It was so quiet, and then all of a sudden I hear helicopters outside, far, far in the distance, it seemed to me. Police officers far, far in the distance. Kids were screaming in the hallway for help. We're trained not to let anybody in the room, and I would say a good 45 minutes went by, maybe an hour, and when we heard the SWAT team come on the floor, but I still didn't trust that it was them, because they were banging on the doors. Police let us in. No one got up. And then they just let themselves in and got us out, and on the way out, that's when I saw Mr. Beagle laying on the ground, and I saw my students laying on the ground. I lost 2 students. and other bodies and carnage everywhere. It was the most awful sight I've ever seen. It's like from a movie.
How are you dealing, having seen this and it being very, very real?
It's awful. You know, I've never had to deal with anything like this before. I mean, I'm a stoic person to begin with. I'm not the most emotional person. And so when I sit and think and I pause about my two beloved students who were killed from that class, it's hard to live with because I love them so much, like they were my kids. I've known Meadow since she's a 10th grader. She took my class because she wanted to have me again, my creative writing class. And Joaquin was like a son. He called me mom. And it's heartbreaking.
What are you holding on to kind of center you and keep you moving forward and waking up every day with hope?
Well, just that I survived and we have to move on. You know, you can't sit there and cower over it. You still have a life. So we're left here on the planet for a reason. Let's do what we're supposed to do. And if we're not sure what that is, we'll figure it out, but we're alive.
And we're all thankful that she's alive, her kids as well.
Now, if you're wondering if that story is from some like random news source or, you know, just from an independent news source, think again. Surprisingly enough, this was on a segment of Good Morning America, but it was in the Florida version of it. So essentially, it was reported once again by local news. Now, why is this important? Well, because this is the second conflicting story that we have heard from local news. The first conflicting story many of you are already aware of is the young lady named Alexa who said that while 2 shots had gone off, Nicholas De Cruz was actually walking with her, and she was talking about how he used to behave and the fact that she thought that he had initially did the attack. But obviously he was right beside her when the shots went off, so she didn't think that it was him. And she even said in that interview that she was surprised that it was him because it didn't really match up to her experience. Now, this is once again another story. Why is it a big story? Because we know for a fact that he was not arrested in body armor. That's what we were told, right? If he was, for example, in body armor, if he really truly was in a helmet, then the videos would have shown that. And it would have been a little bit more difficult for them to identify the suspect as Nicholas De Cruz. Especially considering the fact that the video supposedly had a 26-minute lag. If he had the body armor on. Like, they said that he took an Uber to the school, people. I don't know if we've all have ever held an AR-15, but they don't fit in backpacks. AR-15s can fit in a duffel bag, but AR-15s don't fit in backpacks. However, the official narrative right now is that he took an Uber to school, packed the AR-15 in his backpack, and he also fit all of his body armor in his backpack. And I guess he put the backpack in a locker or put it and hid it somewhere. But it's hard. It's extremely hard for you to convince me that a kid and this is, once again, I've held the real version of the AR-15, if you will, which is the M16 or the M4, depending on which generation in the military you came up in. The M4 is a smaller, more compact version of the M16, a little bit more reliable and lighter. And even an M4 is too big to fit into a big backpack. So to tell me that an AR-15 and full body armor fit into a backpack is ludicrous. But the other problem is that they didn't tell us that. In fact, what they said was that he carried the gun outside of his backpack and then he dropped the gun in the backpack separately. That's how they described it. That doesn't match up with what this woman is saying. And I saw someone who had said that Parkland students live in paradise. Well, first of all, this isn't the first school this woman is taught at. Parkland, it seems like she's kind of newish there, like maybe only a couple of years old. She's taught at other schools as well. But a helmet and full body armor I think the point of that comment, even if she could have once again very well been correct. I'm not going to say that she was wrong about that, but it said, let's say she was over exaggerating. He still had on a helmet. You can't mistake that, right? He clearly had on a thick vest in a different outfit that was not a Douglas High School uniform like the one we saw Nicholas Day Cruz wearing at the moment he was arrested. Now, this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is according to Good Morning America in Florida. This is the second story that directly conflicts with the official narrative that CNN and MSNBC, the Democratic Party, and the 3 17-year-old kids have been pushing. Now, why is that? We could come up with a number of different reasons as to why that could be, and I've covered it substantively on my podcast, but here is another example of the narrative having this very contentious vibe. If we look at a young man named Kyle Khrushchev, he was a survivor as well, and he was kind of invited, if you will, to be one of these kids that touted gun reform and attacked the Republican Party. However, he refused to be that, which was amazing to me because I thought that he perhaps might have been a conservative, and that's why he didn't vibe with MSNBC or CNN. However, and I'm explaining to you in a second, that is actually not the case. In fact, this young man is simply just a rational human being. He did not want to follow the narrative of let's just everybody get rid of guns, let's attack Republicans. He wanted to find a more bipartisan approach and a bipartisan solution to the problem. So CNN and MSNBC shunned him. He did not get a verification check mark. He did not get any love. And in fact, it wasn't until yesterday that he got maybe 2,000 followers once Fox News found him. And a few people started shouting him out so that he can get the type of admiration that the 3 students who are one's already close to 1 million followers after only 400 tweets, reaching over 100,000 followers. Emma Gonzalez, by the way, she reached over 100,000 followers in the first day of her tweeting. She had all of 30 tweets and reached over 100,000 followers and a verification check mark. But let's listen to the story that Kyle tells us, and you'll hear once again another conflict or another contention in the official narrative given by CNN and MSNBC.
So many of your fellow students are saying that the words from Rick Scott and his proposals just aren't enough. Are they enough for you?
I think they're definitely enough, and I think they're doing out of their way to make sure that this will never happen again. I think that clearly mental health restrictions to make sure you have to be mentally stable to acquire a weapon, deeper background checks, and raising the age from 18 to 21, as well as hardening schools, will definitely make sure that this will never happen again.
What do you make of so many of your other fellow students taking it a step or two farther and making this not about sort of never again, but making this more about whether it be banning assault rifles or other much more restrictive gun control measures?
Look, I know these kids on a personal level. I've talked to them personally, and it concerns me a bit because right now this is a bipartisan issue for mental health restrictions and reform, and they're taking it a step further. And that I talked to them personally, and many of them would like a complete ban on all weapons if possible. You can clearly see that slowly, sadly, the agenda is switching from never again to trying to ban weapons, and that's somewhat deeply concerning because I really want to make sure this will never happen again, but still I support the Second Amendment.
That reporting from the top of the show by Matt Finn, that there are serious questions about the Sheriff's Department, not only their response to the shooting with this one school resource officer standing outside, but the dozens of times that officers went to this shooter's home and did nothing. Is that where the conversation should be, or is it time to have...
That is definitely where the conversation should be, and it absolutely outrages me that on the CNN town hall, we had the sheriff who was virtue signaling against the NRA and against guns when he didn't even act properly. The armed officer at our school waited outside, and then the sheriff and his men for 4 minutes let my classmates die while he sat outside and waited. He didn't even do his job properly, and then he comes around and turns around saying guns are the issue when he failed to act properly.
Evidently, there is at least reporting that he knew during that town hall, and we're talking about Sheriff Israel, that he knew that his deputy had waited outside and didn't disclose that, as you pointed out, talked about a lot of other issues. He says he's not going to resign. He says that he's had amazing leadership in his department. You agree with that? Where does the buck stop?
No, not at all. I think he absolutely needs to resign after what happened here. He failed to act on so many different levels, and him himself, he's responsible for this massive failure. This could have been easily stopped, both by the FBI and the Sheriff's Department, had they acted.
I want to play you a clip from one of the other more outspoken students at your school discussing this issue, the failure of law enforcement, and get your reaction. Take a listen.
Obviously, there were some major mistakes made here and ones that we have to look into. And I don't want to say anything until after the investigation's done.
Okay, so he says he wants to wait for the investigation as it relates to law enforcement, but has pulled no punches, shall we say, when it comes to blaming the NRA and others. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's outrageous. I mean, I call BS on this situation right now. It's clear to see that on so many different levels, the Parkland government and officers, they failed to act, and they let us down, and they should have acted on multiple different times
one
to make sure this
question.
would never happen.
Before I let you go, you guys are heading back to school on Wednesday, and it is clear there's a divide in your community. Understandably, there's a lot of anger. There's different political factions here and fault lines. How is your school going to come back together and heal from this?
Look, at the end of the day, we're all one big family. We've seen the amazing support from all different kinds, from every single person. You know, we're really one big family, and then we never, at the end of the day, we're all linked. Taking away our opinions on gun rights, we never want this to happen again. We're all helping each other out, and I think at school on Wednesday, we're going to see that into play.
Well, we will all be praying for you and thinking about you and hoping that you all can come together through this. Appreciate you being on, Kyle, and we'll talk to you soon, my friend.
Thank you. God bless.
Right. So as you can see, once again, that is a totally different perspective than we've been seeing from the about 4 or 5 kids who have been pushed to the forefront of CNN, MSNBC, and the other mainstream media groups, including Cameron Kasky, who was even invited to write an entire article describing the situation on CNN, which, once again, they don't allow unless they can control the narrative surrounding that article. Now, really quick before I continue, like I said, on Facebook, if you're just now joining and you've been having trouble seeing my videos, make sure that you go to that follow button on my page and click see first, and that should hopefully help with the algorithms as far as pushing my videos and my posts to the top of your timeline whenever I start a live stream or post a video. But anyway, so Kyle, as you can tell, has the viewpoint of what I believe is most rational Americans, right? He's saying time and time again, and he even echoed these sentiments on his Twitter account, by the way, that he wants a bipartisan approach. He doesn't want to point fingers at anybody, but he also called out the fact that the kids who are being pushed to the forefront, saying that he knows them personally, and although I'm not the type to appeal to authority, I would think it's fair to say that he does know them personally, considering they go to the same school. And they're obviously being asked to speak in front of the camera. Once again, he's a very well-spoken guy, and he articulated himself very, very well. And it was very clear to me that he is not speaking from emotion or irrationality. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It seems as if he is speaking from like an objective standpoint of someone who's been severely affected by an accident incident that he does not want to occur again. I want you to if you can, by the way, follow him on Twitter. It's at Kyle, Kyle, Kashuv, Kashuv. So that's at Kyle Kashuv. And follow him because up until last night, like I said, he only had 2,000 followers because he refused to just echo the same narratives from CNN. But I want to look at something once again that I think is indicative of where the mindset is at with Kyle versus the mindset of his peers. Now, David Hoggs, as you all know, he's the one who whose father is a retired FBI agent. He writes for the Sun Sentinel, by the way, which is a neoliberal publication in Florida. If you are familiar with the Tim Canova campaign, that is the publication who constantly slanders Tim Canova while supporting Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So as you can tell, that's not a good look. But David Hoggs tweeted, "So how else should we pressure FedEx to end their relationship with the NRA? Same question for Amazon. Also, I've been trying to cancel my Prime membership along with everyone else who doesn't want to support the NRA or who NRA TV." I think he meant anyone else who does support NRA. And how should we go about that? And he tags Amazon. Now Kyle responds with, maybe we could, I don't know, first focus on ending school shootings. Boom. I don't know how much better in so few words could anybody else have said that. Because I 100% agree. But this goes back to what I've been saying over and over and over again, regardless of how you feel about whether or not the shooting happened, which I said the shooting clearly did happen. The circumstances surrounding it are a little murky, but the shooting did in fact happen. And if we want to go about preventing school shootings in the future, we should focus on, once again, a bipartisan approach to ensure that doesn't happen. I said yesterday on my podcast time and time again, which once again Kyle clearly echoes these sentiments, the NRA is a moot point. Like they are a moot lobbying effort. Do you get what I'm saying? Because who does the NRA give most of their money to? Republicans. These same Republicans wouldn't even be elected if they were going to actively and openly vote against gun reform. Or excuse me, if they were going to vote for gun reform presented by the Democrats. Well, they would never do that. Democrats would never do that because that would mean they actually want to solve a problem instead of using it for political leverage. But understand but the reality of it is the NRA is one of the Republican Party's biggest donors. And by trying to coax them out of supporting the Republican Party at all, by totally defunding them, all of a sudden, the Republicans lose a huge amount of their funding. But more importantly, I think, which is what bothers me more, is that there's a bigger picture aspect to this, which is, even though I'm really not a fan of the NRA, I don't like the NRA. I think the NRA is, it's not what it pretends it is, in my opinion. Which is a company that advocates for the gun rights of all. I think that it only advocates for the gun rights of a few. I'm not going to get into that, but most of you all know exactly what I'm talking about. But when you start attacking the NRA and creating this stigma against anyone having a legal firearm, then we get into a much bigger issue, which is the eventual disarmament of the entire U.S. populace, which I am actually avidly against. I think a few people, both progressive and conservative actually, feel the same way that I do, because I'm on the side of, I would put down my arms. I don't have a gun, but I'm saying I would be comfortable with everyone putting down their arms the moment that I trust my government. I do not trust my government. I don't trust them at all. Granted, I don't have drones. I don't have, nuclear weapons, for example. I don't have missiles. But still doesn't mean that I want to just totally disarm everybody. I don't believe in that. And I think that would be opening us up for a lot of problems. Like, if we make arms illegal totally, if we create a huge stigma against weapons, then the good people who adhere to stigmas probably wouldn't have it. But let's be clear, that would not stop our government, which we know is an active cartel in gun sales. That wouldn't stop them from making sure those weapons don't still end up in Chirac, or otherwise known as Chicago, or Fayetteville, North Carolina, which had the second per capita murder rate, or Detroit, Michigan. It wouldn't, the same way it didn't stop, making crack illegal didn't stop crack from getting into the inner city, right? The same way that passing the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, otherwise known as the Civil Rights Amendments, didn't stop racism. The same way that legalizing marriage equity did not stop homophobia. If we just make it so that nobody wants a gun, but the bad people still get guns, then you're essentially relinquishing power and your personal autonomy to the idea that you can trust the people who govern you. And I don't believe that. I don't believe that we can trust the people that govern us. And I don't think most of you believe that. If you're a progressive or conservative, there's no way in hell that you trust our FBI after what's transpired recently. I know that you don't trust the CIA after, well, anything they've ever done in history. They've never done anything for the good of the United States polity. I know that you don't trust, for the most part, if you're on the left, our current sitting president, whether you believe that he's just a pure red-blooded Republican or if you believe he is an ignorant buffoon, or if you're on my side of the fence, which is I don't believe that he is necessarily either, but I do believe that he is easily controlled because of his background. And I don't mean controlled by the Russian government like mainstream media. I mean that he can be manipulated by the powers that be, because it just takes a leak of one of the things involving Donald Trump, and it would probably doom not necessarily his presidency, but it would definitely doom his brand for his family going forward, which I think he wants to avoid. So I don't trust him either. I don't trust the people who are guiding Donald Trump. There are maybe two people in the entire government, and one of them doesn't even work in the government officially anymore, that I would trust. And that's it. And Kyle, echoing these exact same thoughts, notice how he didn't attack the Democratic Party. Did you notice that? Did you notice how Kyle, a person who was also a survivor, a person who was also dealing with the trauma of surviving such a strenuous and emotionally taxing event, if you notice, he didn't attack the Democratic Party. He didn't attack his fellow high school students. In fact, he said he wants to work together and that he believes that once they get into the same school again, that they will once again be on the same team and that they will come up with a solution together to figure out what's the best approach. But he didn't attack. But this young man is just as well spoken. Hell, I would say to a degree, he articulated his points in a much more educated manner than the other four have thus far. And he's actually speaking from a logical perspective, which is mental health does need to be taken care of. He holds the right people accountable. He says, okay, we can talk about the NRA, but the NRA isn't the FBI. The NRA isn't those school sheriffs who stood outside of that building and then claim that we need to talk about gun control as they let a bunch of kids get slaughtered and they were the good guys with guns. Now, I'm not an idiot once again. Which, by the way, I'm going to do another segment on that, but I need to read some more into the shit that I read last night. Just as a hint about what that segment is going to be about. Essentially, there is rumors, that's what I'll say right now, there are rumors and allegations that the Sheriff's Department made a deal with the Broward County Sheriff's Department, made a deal with the Broward County school system, which, by the way, if you don't know, Broward County school systems and the Broward County Sheriff's Department are amongst the two most corrupt entities in the country. And you don't need to guess why, because Broward County is like the first or second largest financed school district. And because of that, you know that wherever there is money, there is absolutely going to be corruption. And once again, that's just another example of it. But essentially, those two entities made a deal that you can't arrest students from Broward County schools so that they can make their numbers look better. Yeah. This is the same Broward County Sheriff's Department who manufactured crack. And the court system at the local Broward County level did not find them guilty. It took all the way to the Florida Supreme Court for them to be finally found guilty. But they manufactured this crack so that they can gentrify the entire area, essentially getting all the black people and the poor people out of Fort Lauderdale so that they could build downtown Fort Lauderdale and make it more attractive during the tourist seasons. And they were successful at that. Even though they were found guilty and all those people were released without homes. Those people lost their homes. Those people lost their jobs. and they are forever part of a scheme that the Broward County Sheriff's Department will never truly have to deal with, because they made all their money from selling out the people of that county. So would I believe that they absolutely would have a deal where they're not allowed to go into those schools and actually do anything about a situation like that? Absolutely. I do believe that. But my point is, the corruption is running deep. Kyle, like I said, just got to 10,000 followers yesterday. After this entire week and a half-ish of this incident going on and being talked about, his peers, one of them, Emma Gonzalez, is closing in on 1 million. Let me say the exact number. Emma Gonzalez is at 951.7 thousand followers on Twitter right now. Oh, another fun fact. Guess who's also sponsoring the March for Our Lives? You guessed it. Well, probably didn't guess it, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The Women's March. The Women's March is sponsoring the March for Our Lives, and they help organize the March for Our Lives. So, wow. It's so funny, right? Because if you listen, if you're not watching, if you don't watch my show, if you don't listen to my podcast, ask them how often I've been wrong about these particular incidents. I'm not wrong because I see the pattern. I said yesterday, do you know what makes me uncomfortable about the attention, not that the issue is getting, but the attention that these kids specifically are getting in regards to that issue? And I seriously, and you can go check my podcast from yesterday. You can either look on Podbean, it posted on YouTube, it posted on Twitter, but check my podcast from yesterday, episode 26, I believe. And I say, do you know why? Because this is smelling a little Women's March-ish. I said, when you take a legitimate issue from a legitimate group with legitimate grievances who are desperate to have their voices heard, it is extremely easy to co-opt it. Why? Because if I'm a 17-year-old, well, let's go talk about the Women's March. If I am a woman who has been notoriously held to unequal standards until 2018, up until and through 2018, especially if I am a woman of color, if I'm truly fearful of what Donald Trump is to bring because of how much the Democratic Party has essentially scared the hell out of everybody, then it is easy for me to latch on to anyone who will give me a platform, anyone who will give me attention, anyone who will show my grievances and make me feel important, like I'm not being marginalized. But in fact, the Democratic Party has notoriously took marginalized people and the legitimate struggles of marginalized people, put them on the forefront, but actually has never instigated any change from that. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you watched the Women's March, if you went to the Women's March like I did last year, then you'd have recognized rather quickly that things that were off were like the NYPD was paid to be there. And if you were at a legitimate protest where change was supposed to come, where you had a legitimate set of demands, not some bullshit fluffy foo-foo, oh, well, maybe it would be nice to be treated equally. Okay, what does that mean? For example, if you look at any of the protests by Black Lives Matter that were indeed peaceful, they had no weapons and they were stomped into the ground by police departments. Look at the protests in North Dakota with Standing Rock, that they were protecting the water for that entire area and of course the land of the indigenous, but that was going to affect everybody and has affected everybody. A woman lost her eye. Another woman lost her arm. These people didn't end up on Ellen DeGeneres. Meanwhile, once I go back to have some dinner at a restaurant in New York after the Women's March, I'm looking on television, and CNN, MSNBC, BBC, everybody is talking about the Women's March and the success of the Women's March and how it's such a statement to Donald Trump. And immediately I knew The Women's March was never about women's issues, but it was about the next election, as usual. The moment that a group could get permits that large and hire a police department to make sure nothing goes wrong, no protest organized like that quickly could achieve such a feat. And we're seeing the exact same patterns. They were able to file a 501c3, 501c4 nonprofit organization for the quote-unquote March for Our Lives, right? They were able to organize buses on a very short notice. They was able to organize a rally in Tallahassee, simultaneously organize a rally in D.C., also able to raise over $2 million, $500,000 of which came from George Clooney, a notorious establishment Democratic Party donor. And once again, all of these kids, the first 4 or 5 of them that are willing to parrot the narrative given to them by the Democratic Party and by CNN, all those kids are 17-year-olds. I think one of them might be 18 now. They're all over CNN, all over MSNBC. These kids, as I said yesterday, these kids have the clout of 30+ year senators, U.S. senators. But the truth of the matter is, when your movement is based around a circumstance that, if passed, if gun reform, if economics, you can talk about women's issues, if it was going to be a legitimate achievement that could upset the balance of the establishment, which almost any reform at this point would upset the balance of the establishment. You don't get TV time. You don't get to be on CNN. You don't get to be on MSNBC. And this kid, Kyle Kushif, is an example of that. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. You want to know how the Democratic Party's hands are all over this? Just almost as famously as the Republican Party, the Democratic Party has a really bad habit of doing one obvious tell, which is they pick the token. So notice, even though all of the other students being pushed to the front have, at this point, about 100,000, 200,000 followers in one case, another 150,000, they all have check marks. But notice the face that you see most often. Notice the face that you see. The girl who shaved her head, Latina, LGBTQ brown girl, with probably the least media experience out of the 4 that are being pushed to the front. Probably the least policy experience as well. Just judging off of how she's talked about the issue. And that girl who shaved her head, brown, Latina, LGBTQ activist, has almost 1 million followers on Twitter. And she was the one who was least active. You think that's a coincidence? That the LGBTQ Latina, in this particular issue, where it's pretty much a bunch of attacks on the Republican Party, is being pushed to the forefront. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing in politics is a coincidence. And all the other kids are just as important. But with this particular issue, she will now get that job she wants, because you don't have to be corrupt when you're 17. You just have to be ambitious. I've seen it happen time and time again. And by the time you finally realize that, holy shit, I'm on the wrong team, I thought they were on my side, you're already too deep in that your entire career, your family's well-being, the lifestyle and livelihood that you have gained because of what you thought was you were doing the right thing, playing for the right team, and it's turned into, holy shit, I can't even sustain myself now unless I play their game. And that is how they get a lot of minorities to stay within the Democratic Party. Because you can't necessarily go to the Republican Party because unless you're naive, they don't necessarily want you, nor could you necessarily win an election. Necessarily. Like that happens every now and then, but look how many black Republicans there were in that picture of Donald Trump taking a picture with all the Republicans. There were none that were elected, I mean. But they're focusing primarily on the NRA. And I've told people off jump, the NRA makes no sense. Why are you focusing on the NRA? The Republican Party doesn't need the NRA to win elections. Common sense. If you live in the South, this is simple fucking political strategy. If you live in the South, go ahead and go to Alabama, go to Texas, go to Florida, go to Georgia, go to Arkansas and say, I know that I'm a Republican, but I think that I'm going to advertise or I'm going to run on gun reform. We're going to actively take offers from the Democrats to talk about gun reform. Hell no. They already ain't got to pay you to come up with that fucking common sense strategy. You don't need the NRA. But here's the other thing. One, the NRA does not exclusively donate to Republicans. In fact, not only do they donate to Democrats, but they donate to Democrats in the right places. A lot of times when we're looking at who raises money, we only look at what happens during the elections. However, we don't talk about what happens after the elections. Like, we don't talk about the fact that the Appropriations Committee and the Defense Committee, who one of the Democrats on there is like a 10 to 12 year senior Democrat on that committee who is paid over $12,000 by the NRA. And people think, well, that's just a committee. That's not that much money. Oh, yes, it is. Because if I am the NRA or any other lobbying group for that matter, why do I need to pay off every Democrat? And instead, I could just pay you to make sure whatever legislation gets written never makes it out of committee. I don't need to pay off every Democrat. I just pay your ass. Ding, ding, ding. So to conclude, because I don't want to hold you all up much longer. To conclude, you have one woman who has come out. Once again, you need to understand this source because it is a big, I'm a big person when it comes to the sources. Some sources you can scrutinize heavily, but still understand that it has value. And the way you should look at sources should help you analyze the value of the message that you're receiving. And it's not always a black and white thing. Like, the value that I get from this particular source reporting this particular story is that, one, CNN, MSNBC, and others have not covered this. And it's, once again, the woman who talked about the body armor saying that there was, and he was letting shots fly across the hallway to the point where she thought it was a police officer. The whoever was shooting that rifle, she thought was a police officer, which means that it probably didn't look like some skinny 17-year-old student. That source for that story in that interview was Good Morning America, Florida. Reported by Adrian Bankert from ABC News, directly in Parkland, down the street from my house. This wasn't Alex Jones. This wasn't some, Wire, whatever the hell that shit is called. You know what I'm talking about. This wasn't Red Pill. This was ABC News. This, once again, is the second local story that totally contradicts what we've been told, because the sheriff's department told us what, people? He dropped his bag. He took an Uber with the rifle, with the fucking AR-15. He took an Uber with an AR-15 in his backpack. Okay, yeah. And, oh, by the way, he also, in his backpack, had an entirely different wardrobe. Apparently. Oh, By the way, here's one last fun fact for you. His court case, if you haven't been keeping up with it, has officially been sealed by the judge. In other words, whatever details that come out about that case, the details of evidence, etc., we don't get to find out about it. And it gets better. They won't even let him testify. In fact, his defense attorney said that this will probably be the last time. Well, I think he had a second hearing a couple of days ago, and that'll be the last time he appears in court. The defense attorney is going to argue for him. And all they have to say at this point, because if you don't plead guilty, which if he did that, I would assume that he would plead guilty. Because, bro, if you really did that and they have you on camera and you can't defend yourself, you're getting the death penalty out here. But instead, that's not what happened. They sealed the case so that we can't know what's going on. They are trying to make him plead, like he's mentally unstable. And once he pleads like he's mentally unstable, that's it. Nothing that he says at this point will have any merit in the journalism world. Because they'll call him crazy. They'll say, oh, you don't listen to a crazy guy? Didn't he plead, blah, blah, blah. Once again, I told you all, this is one of the most corrupt districts in the country. This court, this legal jurisdiction is one of the most corrupt in the entire nation, people. Why seal something as supposedly cut and dry as this? But then make all of his social records, as far as the things that have happened to him with social workers, the police department, sheriff department, whatever. They made all that stuff public. But his personal records, people, are sealed as far as what's happening in the court, the evidence that is presented, the camera footage, everything that we would need to draw a reasonable, logical, and correct conclusion is being totally kept from the public. But why? If this is a cut and dry, we know he did it to the point where y'all were considering having him plead guilty, then why? Why seal up something that is supposed to be a slam dunk? Thank you all so much for tuning in. As usual, I greatly appreciate it. If you are watching right now, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. If you're on Facebook, make sure you hit the follow first so that you can get all of our posts the moment we decide to live stream. Check out our podcast as well. There's so much that we're going to be reporting on the next week. There's so many changes. As you've all seen, you've already met 3 of our new additions to the MCSC network. Caleb, Gerard, and Brandon DeGraff. Caleb and Gerard are the hosts of the podcast Let's Talk Nonsense, and I went on their show yesterday, and that is uploaded to YouTube. Go check that out. And it was a really fun episode. We had a really good time. Those dudes are amazing and very unique. They have a very unique take. They actually used to be Alabama conservatives. When I say Alabama, I mean the place they live in, prohibition is still enforced. So definitely make sure that you go check them out. We also added BC DeGraff, great political commentator, kind of like an expert on all things Bernie Sanders in the primary election and the general election. We have 3 to 4 more people coming on within this next week as well. So it's an exciting time for us here. Make sure that you donate to the One Follow $1 campaign on Patreon. Continue to help the show grow. And always, always remember, ladies and gentlemen, find your balance. Peace.